I want to talk a little bit about how we could make people care. That sounds a bit like manipulating them, but I feel after spending yesterday and today, we talk about why we care and why these issues are important, and there's an ethics point of view to it, and there's our data privacy, there's longevity of the things we do, there's not giving control to corporates. I think there's lots of reasons why we care, but I haven't really seen that many great examples of explaining it in terms that could motivate an individual who's not technology savvy or part of this community to actually say, yes, I understand this is an issue and here's how I've arrived there, and now I will try out the things you're offering. So I think that's a little bit missing from the discussion, and that's, I thought, would be interesting to have and hear people's point of views, because that's what I do for a living, trying to get people to use things and maybe change their mindset about something or build up an understanding of a more complex space at the same time. So when I talked about this with a few of the people, it's my other side. So I am vegan, I've been for quite a long time, and I've been involved with food waste activism in London that is decentralized, a decentralized community that organizes themselves together. So I thought there might be some overlap on what you can learn from how other people organize and get people to care. So I don't have a talk prepared or anything, it's more of a conversation. But I thought I can talk a little bit about kind of what happened with food, if that is interesting, and see how that changed, because I think there is a big change now. So if I walk around Soho, I can get a vegan snack within 2 minutes from here at the normal supermarket, and I can have a really nice coffee with ethical almond milk that I didn't have to pay extra. I double checked. So there's an infrastructure now that supports me. I talked to somebody else who's here who said he tried to be vegan in the 90s and he did it all wrong. He had no support system, he couldn't get food anywhere, he didn't know how to cook, and he felt really unhealthy and stopped doing it after 18 months of being really miserable. And I think that's something where I can relate to that from when I was younger and started to live in this way. And I think it is a similar thing of that community having said the system, how food is centralized and organized, is wrong. It doesn't give you control of what's in your food, it's really unhealthy for you. And then there was the animal rights side of it as well. And there is something about why should you care that was often seen as very negative. So when I said I'm vegan, people thought I was this weird animal liberation front crazy person that is very you're like the left-wing anarchist weird person. That was definitely, as a teenager, the perception. But that has really changed now, and I was really wondering how that came about. And I think there's a few things there in how individuals interact and just live a certain way, and are an example that you could do with using decentralized or open source software that then also goes into what is available as a market. I don't really know how it came about, but I feel the community that's in kind of healthy eating, vegetarianism, food waste, veganism, that it's been going for a long time with patients, but there were a few things that happened that are now at a point where I feel it's a little bit changing. So I don't really know where that came from, but I feel if you want to change the way you eat, I relate it to if you want to change the way you use technology services, you need a certain level of skill. So if you don't understand how to cook and make meals taste nice and what nutrition your body needs, you will fail. So there's a skill level that you need to build up. You need to understand the ethics and buy into them, and I don't think you can convince anyone who doesn't have an inkling of that. You need some confidence. You need to say, I'm different and here's why, and there is a kind of challenging thing of sometimes being excluded socially when you go out to eat, when you're not on certain platforms, which for some of you know that from a technology point of view. You have to have some peers that support you how to do it, and all of that helps you to build up your knowledge. And so if you then want the adoption, you have to create some awareness. And I think there's a lot of stuff that's been happening with, it's easier to relate to your body and to food because you can see how there's health benefits, there's enough research, there's enough studies. But over a long period of time, there's enough of a community, there were enough products, but there's also been enough legislation or initiatives to promote certain things, and the often annoying for restaurants standards on how you have to label all the foods for allergens that happened was for a different reason, but that really, really helps me. So there's something here where everything came together, and then to do things like that at the right time. So there was all the food scandals, and there's lots of celebrities stand up and do that. So I'm not like there's something I wonder how any community can do things at the right time and make sure there are kind of celebrity advocates who do things. If there's news stories, you react in the right way. You kind of lobby government to make things happen. So I think it's still really, really small, but it's become much more easy to eat in a different way, at least here. So that's the kind of one side of it that I'm not entirely sure how it relates, but looking at the decentralized and open source things, I'm wondering who are the kind of celebrities speaking up for it, and what are the news stories that put this into people's perceptions. There aren't really enough peers or things, if you meet someone there's I don't know how many percentage of the UK are vegetarian, but it's at least 10%, so you often meet someone who can show you how to do things, and I don't think we're there with technology at all. So, but I'm thinking a little bit along the lines of what are other things that came about to change, and how could we do this, and what is kind of missing in having enough of a groundswell to react to things that are, for example, a news story, and then you can provide alternatives. And the food waste movement in London specifically has done similar things, of having huge events. Like Feeding the 5,000 is a big event. It's on Trafalgar Square, I think, every year, where there's a meal cooked out of food waste, and it's completely vegan. So that's feeding 5,000 people and giving them something to eat that they normally thought would not be tasty at all. There's enough kind of celebrity spokespeople, but there's also a lot of things done. So if you want to reduce your kind of food waste footprint and eat a different way, there are kind of projects out there where you can see a map of London and you can see where do you go, who do you talk to, what are the organizations. So there's a lot of stuff there that is small but available. In this community, we talked about there isn't really a list of anything available out there. It's really hard to find what is going on. There's nothing you can point to really. So I've just been trying to think about the two, but now I'm going to shut up and see if anybody can relate to this at all or not, or what you think about that, or if you have questions. Because I could talk about this for a longer time.
Right. It's not really a question, but can I posit something as to why that
should
came
be a
about?
discussion.
Yeah. So I work in digital campaign. Well, I was working in PR, mainly for sort of big corporations on the dark side, as it was. And a lot of the work that I was doing there was actually, depending on how aligned the interests of the clients were, was working with civil society to try to push things forward. And whenever you're trying to change policy or to raise awareness about a certain thing, what you're trying to do is actually just hit awareness or raise awareness across a whole spectrum of stuff, which can go from lobbying MPs directly to get a bill through or a public hearing, actually doing, if you talk about the vegan movement, let's say you have PETA that is doing shop tactic stuff which are replicated across the board on a number of issues. You need to hit the mainstream media using those tactics, but also you have a lot of things that just came about by the sheer virtue of the internet spreading and disseminating information about how food is produced, all the health scares that are associated with it, not just blow-ups and you find out that your beef is actually horse, but the fact that you have obese people, that is becoming an epidemic. An epidemic of obese people is just a ridiculous thing in a way. And all of these things sort of add on to or feed off each other. And it doesn't seem to me that it is something that you can, from bitter experience as well, trying to raise awareness on more obscure things or less obvious things. It doesn't seem to me that it's something that you can just create out of nothing. It just requires a huge amount of dedication from people like you who are at the grassroots, a lot of coordination, and a lot of co-opting people who are in the mainstream system to just relentlessly bash out the messages.
And I think it's that co-opting. I mean, it's good that you bring up campaigning, but I think there is a way of like storytelling
Yeah.
And with alternate food stuff, it is at a point where now some people related for animal rights reasons there was the past, and that didn't really sell. But if you think about the trend that goes back to being in control of what you eat and sustainability and kind of scares about what's in your food, I felt suddenly there was a message that was much more aligned with what people could relate to. So I'm thinking for this stuff, what is the message you could tell? Because suddenly there were more broader messages, and suddenly one of them did stick a little bit more and had more health reasons and other stories around it that then were used in a better way. And I think there's this nostalgia, I feel, generally about going back to understanding, being in control of your body, making food. There's this kind of trend that's helping it. What happened was that suddenly this was cool as well. So some of the food I eat that was that cheap in the past is not really expensive because suddenly it is cool. So I was thinking a little bit about if you would campaign this, what is the story you can start with that people can relate to most? And we talked about storage and being in control of your own data and kind of can you still look at your own photos in 30 years? So would that be a story where you can tap into some of that nostalgia, and being in control yourself would be cool. I don't know.
Can I ask a question? Because so I've heard from other vegan friends that I've had, some of them quote a massive performance improvement in their just ability to think clearly, to work longer hours. I think they eat a lot more, or the way they eat a lot different. And I'm no expert, but a lot of them claim to be that they feel a lot cleaner, and as a result, they're able to operate at what they feel at a higher level, because they're not eating food that makes them sluggish, or that gives them peaks and dips in terms of sugar levels, etc. I don't know. It's a question.
That's true. I think that's what for anything where you want people to change, that people want short-term wins, and it's really hard to get them to buy into something that requires them to change and focus on long-term benefits. And if it's about your body, if somebody helps you to understand how to do it, you can get there if you eat right. So if I give you the knowledge, and
it
stick
takes a
with
while for your body to change the way it processes food and gets energy, right? But once you get through that barrier, you all of a sudden.
And that's with any healthcare behavior change. How to get people to care is you show them by their own bodies, and you give them the tools to make the change really easy. Now, with something like technology use, it becomes much harder to see what is my long-term gain with this. It's really, really difficult. But I think we're all talking about behavior change as well, just in how you use to think about technology. And that's the same with nutrition or healthcare, or what we talked about energy consumption earlier. Some of these things are short-term, and you can see a value quickly. But if we want people to change how they think about technology in the long run, it is very difficult, but I think the same principles apply and I think anybody who works in trying to get people to eat differently has thought a lot about what is something I can give you really easily to show you value very quickly and guide you along. And I don't know, I certainly when it comes to decentralization and other tools, I don't know enough about how the general public feels about these things. I don't know enough about their current mental models, about how to use centralized technologies, to be able to tell you, here's how I think I could help them change. So I think that's something where I'm looking into, I don't know who's doing research into this, or how you could build up this understanding about how people think about technology, because I could see myself, once you know how people think about food and what the triggers are and what you have to give them to change, and what value they need to see, you can have an impact and help them change. But that needs a lot of insight, and I didn't get the feeling that people here have enough insight yet. Yeah. You felt enough.
So I really like the analogy to food and vegan. I think the things about feeling a bit like a rebel or a bit outside is probably quite that we try to call it. It feels a bit like frontier land, kind of digital frontier land, and I'm sure veganism felt like that 15 years ago. But both sides need to get better, right? So like it's easier to be a vegan now, partly because the vegan food has got better and like more nicer, and it's actually less. Probably 15 years ago, vegan food you could buy around here would have been fairly horrible food. Now it's much, much better. So that's kind of the onus on our side, is to like make everything actually palatable, if that's not stretching the analogy.
Yeah.
But also we're talking here about if you're targeting end users directly, like the general public directly, like decentralization is a kind of groundswell movement. I wonder if there's another approach to encouraging more use of this, which is around targeting organizational users first, or I suggested that like governments might be the first people who want, software projects that aren't hosted in America for like good like national security reasons, followed by corporations who are more likely to host their email server, followed by that kind of thing. So perhaps starting like if we're asking the question, how do we get more people to use it? Perhaps starting at the kind of ground movement isn't.
I think you have to do both. So the Tristram Hunt, who's the biggest UK food waste campaigner, his organization only works on lobbying level. They only go after governmental organizations and the industry and changing the system of the industry and legislations around it. He doesn't do any work on the ground. So that's why the system for just in the UK for people who campaign that is already, there's a loose community, but there's enough people who work on different levels and they all coordinate quite well. I think Max was trying to say something for a while.
I think there's lots of interesting things, a lot of interesting comparisons we've never thought about before here. I'm personally not vegan, so I'm sort of extrapolating to think about how it works. But one of the problems from the indie web or decentralized community typically is that the services don't, the critical mass of adoption is needed for people to really benefit from adopting a lot of the technologies that we are developing. And I think that the similar thing is that it's really hard to be the first one, right? The first one when you're vegan and you need to find these things out for yourself, perhaps is similar to the fact that you're the first one running this self-hosting platform. And it's pretty lonely to be the only user in a social network. And so you really choose strategies. And one of the, you can make that social network try to coexist and leech on the other social network. The equivalent of that maybe would be to try to see if you can persuade establishments to provide vegan options. Another option, the alternative, is to make it exclusive and cool, to be completely separate and say, hey man, here's a space which is completely safe and cool and all the elite people are there. And we're not going to make it interoperate at all with this other thing, right? So come join the like, right? So we have this full option with this kind of, we can make things interoperate with Facebook if you wanted to, Or we could be like, I don't care if I don't have friends. I had friends before it was cool, right?
Well, I think it's the vegan movement suffered from the being cool, and because most you can alienate people a lot if you tell them why they should care about ethics, and if you tell them that they're wrong in a way that doesn't give them a why enough and makes them feel stupid and very critical. I think that there is a risk that whatever you choose to do differently because of your values, to say, do it in the wrong way and say, I want to include you, but I'm sounding like this exclusive know-it-all, and that really damaged the vegan movement, I think. And I think there is a risk that if we go on about why you should use open source or other things, that we make people feel a bit like we're the cool club and they don't know. I'll take, who's been first?
You were first.
Okay. I don't see you guys.
There are two things I want to put input to this. One is that also for the vegan food, I think, we all live in a capitalist society, and the vegan movement in the beginning also was very left-wing, and it's all bad. The economy, capitalists are bad, they make money. But it really got a huge boost when people saw that they could also make money off of vegan food, and vegan food can be a business model. I think it's also for us in the decentralized movement, we need business models. Of course, I'm biased because I'm trying to build a business model on decentralization, but I think that this will also help to solve the problem of palatability. Because if I want to build a business model on decentralization, I have to care not only that I like to use it and that it's good enough for me, but I have to really make it possible to use for a bigger market, and that makes it easier to use for other people. And the other one that just came to my mind when you said that the vegan movement suffered from being the know-it-all. There is this joke about how do you find out if someone's a vegan? Don't bother, he'll tell you.
Not the case with me, but I agree.
Not the case with me, but
agree.
but I don't know. Of course, this maybe makes some enemies if you take the stance consistently and tell the people about it. But on the other hand, it also puts it on the landscape.
But it's not about talking though. It is about doing it, and this is where you have to put in the effort. And if you are in a shared office and you bring in your own vegan lunch every day, this is how you get people to try weird foods they haven't tried before. And this is the same with technology. If you continue to be the one that uses this and somebody in your family, I know this is from the ground up, but this is showing it on a day-to-day level. And we're also, that's coming in to build better products, but did you want to say?
No, I didn't say.
No.
I'm fine. Sorry,
I'm getting lost.
I think if you're looking at it from a technological perspective as well, I completely agree with what he's saying. We need incentives, but you also need to start from the beginning as you would create any product and study or do some research on, what are the reasons for which or where the problems lie. So, for example, I was reading the other day on the BBC. It's not the same thing, but it's related. That most women who smoke during their pregnancies tend to be from poorer neighborhoods and poorer backgrounds. And I think from what I've read on the food in general, the people who tend to eat the worst, shittiest processed food are also from the poorest backgrounds, right? So if you have a problem then of maybe these people don't have access to, lots of technologies or don't have money to pay or whatever for the expensive food, and they are hard to reach, then how can you start looking at, in a decentralized way, at going into those communities and finding out who the champions are, who the capitalists are, what their concerns are about their food, health, or whatever. And then it goes back to what you were saying about storytelling, because then how do you then push that message and find business models and incentives in particular for them to adopt a different way of eating. And that might be that it's cool for some people, or it might be that it gives them a business model or something that they can sustain on. It might give them a sense of community that they might have lost or whatever. But you can't fly.
Just to comment for another question, it's for this, I think the problem in that space is the business models, but we have people here who work in education, like Linda's done that to educate people about technology. But for the food side of things, I've worked with poorer communities on council estates around London. And the one thing that we've learned from having all the insights is people need to understand how meals are composed, and that's the knowledge that's lacking. So giving them recipes to follow is the wrong way. You need to help them understand how flavors work together, and especially if someone has children, how texture is really important. So it's base knowledge how to construct a meal rather than teaching recipes. So I think there was some insight that is now in that community knowledge around how to educate people. That is, if you want to start a local food project, you can get that from different sources and get things around how to teach people those skills from the ground up to equip them with understanding it themselves. So I don't know what the technology equivalent of it is, or what is the basic knowledge around how the internet works that you need to teach in a certain way. But that insight was really helpful to understand how to teach it to people and make sure they can build on it. And I think in the past people tried to scare people or go too much around recipes, and that was wrong. That all of these projects that just went that approach just died off once the person that was pushing it on a council estate with women there was gone, it stopped. Versus if you give them modular skills for themselves, they continued.
I'm very in connection with what we just talked about. I think, I wouldn't have talked about this 2 years ago before I had a child, but I figured that I'm going even further than just the business model. It's already at the stage of education, and in general it's morals, right? We actually have to teach children about morals. And we have to find the denominator of both food and technology, and at some point we come down to morals, right? It's about teaching morals. So if we teach our child what is healthy and good in life, which is not consumerism in terms of food, which is just looking about what's healthy, and the same technology, it's pretty obvious what's morally right and wrong, even though morals are relative. But we see that centralization is morally not really right, and decentralization makes it all more equal. So it's getting down to morals and actually teaching children and educating people and children on what's right and wrong. It's very simplified, but yeah, it's like the same little pieces in all the little categories.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've discovered something else since I listened to that. Is just to carry on just a second from that theme. Is that yes, I agree about that. And one of the things that separates open source and all the other good stuff from, if you like, Windows World and everything like that, is the idea of a consumer and the idea of an active citizen. And I'm also seeing that in actually what you're saying, is that you participate in your life, you make decisions. You don't just go down to the chicken shop and buy stuff. I'm actually surprised what you said does work on the estates, because I work on them somewhat. And one of the reasons that they wouldn't do that is that very often they're time poor. They're poor and they're time poor. So the chicken shop is is immediate. But down to the other stuff is that what I found basically in my own life is advocacy, because I don't think this movement generally has a lot of resources. So my son, a number of members of my family, my ex, etc., are now Linux desktop users because I've talked to them. In the case of my ex, that was because I got fed up with all the support calls, and that's actually, has gone right down, because, for example, Linux does not suffer from Windows viruses. That's a big win. Second big win is, again, on the estates. We have one big one which was actually dumped by estate politics, that there's a lot of kind of, warring clans on estates. We actually had a 15-seat Linux computer suite on an estate on Commercial Road. We did all that. The server, central server, 15 seats, everything like that. We actually blagged the computers from somewhere, and I think it cost us about 500 quid. Whereas the computer suites that normally go into the estates with grants tend to cost about 15,000. And after 3 months, and I dealt with this, they're trashed with viruses as well. So actually there are some very salient concrete points about, why we should be doing this, and they're communicable. Unfortunately, as I see it, the sort of high-level lobbying, etc., it's a lot harder to do that because there are no resources to do it. There are no resources to do it. And the last thing is, of course, eating is not elective. You have to actually eat, whereas computing is actually elective, and that means that. in my day. But that actually is something of a big difference. So yeah, I'll thank you, and I'll stop now.
You kept an eye on who wants to say something.
And for me, the analogy with the food movement for me is very much about the grassroots. I think veganism has a huge grassroots presence these days, and it started off at the grassroots movement. In tech, that's less the case. You get a startup in Silicon Valley, they show up, they give everyone Twitter, they market it aggressively, and that's how things become a success, and that's partly why it's centralized so much. But there are a lot of grassroots communities, certainly in the UK, around tech. You've got your user groups, you've got your geek girls, you've got your coder clubs, all these things, and more are showing up all the time. And a little project I'm getting started with up in the grim wastes of the north with a friend of mine, we're experimenting with the idea of a very local community decentralized host of alternatives to Twitter, email, that kind of thing, where we run it for the benefit of the people around in a non-profit way. I'll say, because I'm not wearing a suit. It's a lovely suit. And basically, I need to see if that's going to be a success. And if it is, it might be worth replicating as well. And that's pretty much it.
I'm thinking about that now just in terms of how it's been organized on the grassroots level, because the tech community feels very connected, but
There are
it's,
lots of different tech communities.
yeah, exactly, and I think where there are kind of very anarchist kind of groups that do illegal things in the vegan space, generally it feels like the community is more, I guess the coming back to morals and values, that is much, much stronger. There's in a way that was so unifying that if you want to do certain things, it's very easy to find something that's a pack online that you can use to do your own thing somewhere locally. So there is a way that this is organized on the kind of ground level that is better, I sometimes feel, than on a certain technology level. But maybe this is because there aren't many business models, people just do it for the love of it rather than...
And you're not making a profit from sorting out food waste, you're just making things better.
Well, you compete for government funding.
Oh, okay.
Done that, not doing that.
I think the key thing in terms of the size of the community for any kind of decentralization or any kind of project is to get it at the right size, and that's kind of tied in or intrinsic to the model that exists in the corporation. So as an example, I mean, I don't know if other universities do this, but there's a Hare Krishna guy who goes around to the LSE campus every day of term time and gives out free vegan food, basically. And there's always a huge queue of students. Well, one, because you can give donations, and the donations go to charity and a variety of other things, but basically the food's free, it's vegan. And when I first arrived there, when I was studying the part-time masters, I was like, oh, I don't know. And then eventually somebody said, you should try it, it's really good. And I tried it, and it's the best food you can buy on campus. It was actually delicious, and I would spend the extra time queuing. And there's a very strong parallel there, obviously, LSE, bastion of sort of, you know, neoliberal capitalism, etc. And these guys are like trying to change the way people think about it. And I think that's a very interesting thing, because I think food is a very social activity. You know, I mean, if you think about kind of a family unit, it's where everybody sort of sits down at the table, it's after school, after work, where traditionally, at least in our Western mindset, this was a sharing. But this doesn't only happen in Western cultures, it happens in cultures everywhere in the world. You know, that breaking bread or sharing food is actually really important. So I think in terms of taking the vegan movement to the next level, I think it needs to focus and interact on that, the right level of social engagement. And you know, I mean, I could definitely see a model where every suburb and borough has somebody like that Hare Krishna guy. Use an unused building or convert the chicken shop into a very simple vegan buffet that people just don't even have you don't have to have that much choice. There's something different on every day of the week, and you just go and pick up your meal. And I think there's so many interesting models around that, and I think a lot of people would buy into.
Yeah, I mean, that's what food waste people are trying to do, but it's an easy thing, you know, as you said, it's already social, it's already really easy, versus if you think about the psychology of making people care about something, it's much harder for technology, because hosting your own like data or making sure you have your photos somewhere that's it doesn't benefit from that social everyday thing yet. It is something that's much harder.
You could almost say that in some ways food at the moment is too decentralized. Like everybody goes and buys their microwave meal from Sainsbury's, whatever, rushes home, cooks it, or cooks for themselves, uses their own oven, microwave, stove, which is actually energy inefficient. It makes a lot more sense to have one kitchen that makes a lot of good food. You can save a lot of energy.
Well, that's how you make it, but the food, one of the things that I know, and that's in the German-speaking culture, so there's a cultural thing where the adoption of this, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel in Austria or Germany, there's much more, like there's more product, there's more stuff around organic, but like I know a lot of people are rethinking how they consume things because of the centralized food system, and worries around that, and worries about what's coming from the US around trade agreement. There's a lot of concern about the centralized food system where it's a thing that people are suddenly talking about or understanding, and I don't know exactly where that came from.
That isn't part of the issue, that while we see the centralized, decentralized approach to technology as a moral issue or an efficiency issue, that actually most people don't see this. So I think in that way we are very far away from the vegan movement, which I think is more accessible, just because food is more accessible.
Yeah.
And I think if there's anything that we as a community can do, at least one of them, is to stop fetishizing complexity. there's an element to technology communities that revel in the discussions and the nitty-gritty of technology. In the same way, the best way you could turn people off from a discussion about adopting vegan foods would very quickly be to start talking about the centralized approach to agriculture.
Exactly.
Most people don't care. So I think if we're going to find a way of using language like what is moral and what is not, then we need a much simpler argument for why a decentralized web is better. Other than, and it can't be things like, again, because I don't think outside of the true believers, I don't want to be a food expert to be able to be vegan.
And
If
the
I
thing is, you don't have to be anymore.
Exactly, and
So
this
I
is
think-
my point, that what we lack, I think, is a way for this to be accessible to people. Most people don't see a difference between, so the notion that somehow services provided by some organizations are centralized means nothing to people outside this community, and there's no morality attached to it. I just want to send email. I really don't care who's like. So yeah, I think we're like several steps behind. Long before we get to discussions about how can we make it more efficient, I don't think anyone cares that it's centralized or decentralized.
And I think how you make them care is if you tie into morals, though, because the stuff I did around with people, like, I mean, you have some experiences in that, but when I first met up with people around campaigning, just as a non-for-profit, I said, oh, if you want to think about that, they basically opened my eyes for how do you make it really accessible for people, but you also get them kind of value and morals thing across in an accessible way, and anybody who does political campaigning does that very well.
But this is my point.
And there's something there where I felt there is an art in getting something simple out to people, while still in the way you talk address those morals and those values, and
So I think the interesting point then is, what is the skill level that is required for people to be able to make those judgments? Why is it so bad that services are provided in a really centralized way? And kind of understanding that, what is bad about that, if it means actually I can easily send emails? Because there's no alternative. So what we haven't had is if anything, many centralized solutions have made life simpler. So we have the exact opposite of a food scandal. So it's not a case of, guess what, you thought it was beef, but it was actually horse meat. Oh my goodness, how can we go back and find out more about the system?
And that is, I don't know if enough has happened yet, because the food stuff has benefited from scandals, and I don't know if this Snowden thing was a big enough scandal. One thing I forgot to mention earlier, which is about making it easy for people, there's a US startup that is producing burgers and meat that is completely vegan, but they're trying to make the exact same product, and they found a way to make it bleed like a real burger would. So that is, for me, the one thing that I'm watching, thinking that their theory is, if we give you the product that replaces the thing you already have it's the same, will you change or not? For me, when we talk about what if somebody would build a Facebook that is decentralized and as awesome as the existing Facebook for normal users, I'm like, I wonder if that burger thing is going to succeed in that way without, will people buy it who don't have any awareness of the wider issues or not?
I mean, but I feel like what we've also been talking about is like social movement history, and like especially when you were talking about like big incidents or like things that kind of change how people viewed veganism. I mean, it sounds like a lot of what we're talking about, and especially what you're getting at, is like, how do we lay the groundwork so the next time a really big thing happens, we are able to talk to people in a way that is accessible, that we can then like really get some momentum. And like, that's not the only way that things change. Don't want to try to make that argument, but like, I think that is sometimes how we like move forward in a big leap, is like, something happens that isn't something that we could campaign for, that isn't something that we could have created, but if we're ready to take advantage of that moment, then like we can really push the conversation forward. And I think that a lot of that is being able to like see that there is a huge data breach or something with Snowden or something that happens, and like be able to talk to people in the language of how they're experiencing that moment and push forward into the goals that we have in this community.
And if you build on that, you can actually, but if you build on that, you can actually, this is where it comes back maybe to decentralization and the tech sector. I mean, you can actually try to provoke those kind of scandals, right? If you have a network of people who are, look, there's a grassroots journalism now that is being funded by individuals in order to research stuff in specific stories that interest people. It's a whole new business model. If you have a bunch of people who are interested in investigating that stuff, you already have the crusty anarchists that are doing illegal stuff. There's no reason why there shouldn't be people within journalism or whatever who are doing investigations. You fund that in a decentralized way, and you make sure that whenever those findings come out, you have a network of people who spread out the word. It's something that you can then start using technology for as well.
Precisely this is happening with tax justice at the moment.
Yeah.
I think what I feel is that when we're talking about poorer communities and the issue of how do we make people understand something, I think maybe it's because I'm from Germany and certain areas like refugees or also food and so on, I see actually a significant fraction of the population and also civilians being interested and seeing the problem. And when I actually talk to people, friends and so on, they're asking me, okay, what can I do? You know? So, and I think that ties back to the poorer community thing is, it's about agency. I think people need to feel some agency that they can actually do something that makes a difference. You know? And if I tell somebody who's like working 10 hours a day for a very shitty paid job, you know, needs to raise some children and is like really stressed in their daily time, you know, and I tell them, well, why don't you grow a garden and, you know, do some other things. It's not really within what they feel is their agency on many levels. So on the one hand, it's kind of like, okay, raising awareness, but it's also understanding where people stand in terms of what they feel they have as agency, and kind of like when you're saying this is how you can actually construct better meals, for example, or this is how you can maybe have something like neighborhood. I like to think about neighborhood technologies, because even if we don't build the great world computer that is decentralized and so on, I guess most of us could go to their own neighborhoods and bring direct benefit in terms of setting up servers where people can connect to. You know? It's just that in most neighborhoods are kind of like disintegrated. Everybody's just using like mobile phones and distance technologies all the time, and the actual neighborhood doesn't actually talk to each other or organize anything together, like food, you know, or communications. And it's actually possible today. Like you can have like street forums where people talk about stuff happening in their vicinity. You know, this doesn't happen, but it's technically totally possible, and it's like could go in anywhere, right? And so I think it's sometimes that even in the decentralized community, we are thinking about these global solutions, whereas most of the problems, also in terms of agency, are really local. Like how can people feel empowered and connected and have agency within their environment where they are? And technology is really just one part of that problem. You know, and it's already there in many aspects.
But doesn't that create another problem then, in that we set ourselves up to do much, much more? So if we're saying technology is just one part of that, and actually there are many other things that are broken in our system, that means people don't organize at a local level, then we're not just setting ourselves up to provide the technology to do that, but also to push people to do something they're not doing now, which seems like a much harder task than the issue of.
Yeah, but to me it feels good. I'm doing this now for organizing, for example, something regarding the refugees who are arriving like in a big building a few streets on, and I'm organizing some people I've never met before, what to do about it. And this sense of community, where I previously felt it's like an alienated, nobody knows anybody, it's anonymous, like it's a typical situation in big cities, nobody knows anybody. And it feels very good actually to be able to connect and do something together. Like, I don't just go to far away conferences talking to some other hacker types. I actually am engaged with like my direct environment. And that's I think really a useful thought. And not just think about global technology, but actually local stuff you can do.
Can we have one more voice that have a big join? So this is actually something about the fetishites in complexity and morals as a narrative. I don't want to get into the conversation, so it might seem like a tangent now, but I think I agree with you, but then I think it's not so much the morals, but the implied superiority when you talk about morals that actually is a turn-off. Because for me, I grew up in India, and vegetarianism is a function of class and caste. So if you are born in a higher caste, you are automatically a vegetarian in family, and that actually turned me off vegetarianism or veganism for that matter. It was a socialist concept, and that
Right.
and I think that's sort of a factor here as well. Just because I use decentralized technology doesn't make me better than you. But often the conversation is that's how it's framed, because you are an idiot for using centralized technology because you don't understand what you're doing. So I think that's possibly something that we need to do better in framing it as not as a, I'll make you better. I'll make you a better person by giving you ideas on how to use decentralized technology.
So, do you want to make one wrap up? I have one brief announcement. When we end this session, can we not clap because the child that's here is actually asleep?
You can clap in sign language, which is this way.
Yeah. So, you want to wrap up and then we'll.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming. I thought it would be like 5 people interested. It was many more. I hope it wasn't too far-stretched. But I encourage you, if you are interested in explaining this better to human beings, there's lots of stuff out there about behavior change and mental models and how to understand how people understand something, and then see how that helps you frame your message. So read into this, and if anybody's doing some research into how people think about technology and how aware and all the way they are about decentralization, how we can explain it, given I'm a researcher, I'm happy to help with that, so let me know.